Hello, in this presentation I will discuss my experience as a composer in designing tools and strategies for the sonification of prosodic data. The modular system I've developed consists of a set of independent tools implemented using Lisp and the Lisp-based programming environment OpenMusic. The modules serve three functional purposes: the spectral and temporal analysis of the speech signal, the processing of its low-level features aimed at the extraction and quantization of perceptual parameters, and the mapping of the processed parameters onto acoustic signals or into a symbolic representation such as MIDI and music XLM. This architecture has been subjectively tested over many years in compositions for solo instruments, ensemble, and orchestra. The main goals of my research are twofold: the design of an adaptive strategy for reducing temporal, frequency, and amplitude resolution of the speech signal, and the exploration of the pitch and temporal structures underlying the prosodic perception. On the temporal dimension, the prosodic information can be extracted considering different time scales. A coarse-grained solution is to segment the speech signal using a single cluster of partials per syllable. In this case, analysis frames are downsampled dynamically depending on the syllabic rate. More frames are used for rapidly changing segments and fewer for steady-state segments. Since the syllabic rate across languages vary between 5 and 11 syllables per second, data will change every 91 to 200 milliseconds when using this approach. That is between a 16-note and a 30-second note played at about 82 bits per minute. If the sonification of the prosodic data is meant to be performed, this is a good news because sounds can often be articulated at this speed by acoustic instruments. The bad news is that this is not enough when prosodic variation within a single phoneme, such as tonal glides in vowels, has to be considered. In this case, resolution has to be initially kept sufficiently high to detect any perceptible prosodic details. Subsequently, the size of the data tree can be progressively reduced by means of different kinds of filters and clustering operations. The idea here is to shrink the prosodic features through a sort of spectral stylization, a procedure that modifies the partial trajectories of an utterance into a simplified form with the aim of preserving relevant perceptual information. In the following example, durational values extracted from this speech excerpt
every single year, more than 30,000 Americans
have been firstly quantized using small binary subdivisions. Secondly, the binary subdivision has been further quantized using different tuplets depending on compositional constraints. Pitch resolution needs to be reduced when scoring for instruments that do not allow continuous frequency changes like marimba or piano. However, in my experience, the lack of continuity between consecutive notes of prosodic information is not as detrimental as it might seem at first glance. The following example presents the inverse FFT reconstruction of the first 12 partials of this audio.
How did this become such a partisan issue?
Without a reduction in pitch resolution.
How did this become such a partisan issue?
And with a 12-tone quantization of pitch using marimba samples.
How did this become such a partisan issue?
If the sonic articulation is fast enough, the Gestalt principles of auditory grouping can induce a continuity illusion. What about amplitude resolution? Is a lack in dynamic nuances truly detrimental in prosodic perception? Well, variation in partial amplitude over time are important when language or cultural conventions narrow the average dynamic range of speech and when prosodic features are correlated with the spectral changes in the timbre of the source voice, as in the assessment of vowel quality. On the other hand, the dynamic science provided by the traditional music notation is limited as compared with those used for pitch and durations. And more importantly, their interpretation is highly subjective among musicians. Most musicians agree on the pitch of a well-tuned C, but not on how loud a forte should be. Yet, in my experience, several phonemes can be recognized even when the amplitude of speech partials is heavily quantized. In this example, the transcription is realized by applying a 16th-step amplitude quantization, whereas a 3-step quantization only is used in this other example. A second aim of this research is the exploration of the pitch and temporal structures underlying prosodic processing. Prosodic speech structures result in the production of prominences, that is, the concurrent and coherent change in loudness, length, and pitch that are used to emphasize a given phoneme or syllable in speech. As speech is concerned, non-tonal language like English and Italian make use of pitch prominences to mark syntactic boundaries, but also to highlight some parts of an utterance. Particular intonation contours may reveal the feelings of the speaker about what she or he is saying, as well about his or her emotion or attitude towards some referent or proposition. The following examples show an excerpt performed by a cello from the speech melody of Barack Obama addressing the Arab students of the University of Cairo in 2009. Each segment of the utterance is emphasized by a pitch accent, but only one, they have taught at our universities, is stressed by a pitch above A3. Considering the specificity of his audience, it is worth considering that soaring pitch accent not being casual.
They have fought in our wars, they have served in our government, they have stood for civil rights, they have started businesses, they have taught at our universities, they've excelled in our sports arenas, they've won Nobel Prizes, built our tallest building, and lit the Olympic torch.
The way different prominences are performed on the time domain contribute both to highlight the pivotal point of the discourse and to shape the cadence and the rhythm of the speaking voice. This example is from another speech by Barack Obama, dedicated to the common sense gun safety reform meant to reduce gun violence in the US. Here, the prosodic prominences pattern used by Obama has been sonified using the string section of a symphonic orchestra. Different orchestration solution has been employed to elucidate the seductive rhythm of his voice.
Our right to peaceful assembly. That right was robbed from movie doors in Aurora. Our unalienable right to life and liberty, pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara, and from high schoolers in Columbine.
From my perspective, the sonification of prosodic data by means of acoustic instruments is challenging for at least two hard laws. The first one is the exploitation of the speech data through its reduction. Representing sound through sound makes sense only if an augmented perception is provided to the listener. At the same time, such augmentation must imply downsampling, filtering, and quantization procedures because of the instrumental and notational constraints, which are often impossible to overcome. The second hurdle has to do with the connotation of the traditional musical instruments. The use of common musical instruments may introduce potentially misleading artifacts based on the subjective expectation and knowledge. To put it straight, when an orchestra is used to sonify the prosody of a speaker, what listeners know about orchestral music will influence their perception. Yet, in my experience, these two hard laws can be turned into opportunity. The audiovisual cues provided by the performer tend to draw the listener's interest toward an inspection of the prosodic data while neglecting the lexical meaning of the utterances. And finally, the instrumental sonification of prosodic data pushes the listeners to reflect on a double pathway that ties together both prosodic and musical communication, the musical nature of prosody, and the prosodic connotation of many music languages. Thank you.